Okay, I'm back. This is the second part of the weighing lecture that I gave earlier. I know it's a little bit late, but I've been working on it a little bit and changing things up. I've been adding some examples that I think will be very helpful. So this part of the weighing lecture will cover the win by one model, something I call retrosynthetic weighing, which is all of these weird like charts. And then we will also talk about how to compare extinction links and how to debate different framing like structural violence and extinction framing. Then finally, my favorite part of this, we will talk about non-consequentialist and non-utilitarian philosophies and how you can apply them to PF in the best ways. And I think the most important thing that I will do in this lecture, well, arguably there are two. One is like, I want to teach you how to actually do weighing and extinction debates because that is a skill that has disappeared. And two is I will actually give you examples of how you can win off of philosophy in PF, and like I will give speeches that show you exactly what I mean. Because I think some people are skeptical of this, and I also think the way that people are using philosophy in PF right now is wrong. I'm very dogmatic about this kind of stuff. Um, I will admit, like the vast majority of the things I will say in this lecture, they're opinions, right? Like you should be a free thinker, think for yourself, and decide if you think that I'm right. But I do have pretty strong opinions on this. I think I have some pretty good reasons for those strong opinions. So consider it. Yeah. All right. We're going to start with win by one. This is a philosophy of how you should do debate. And it's a philosophy that's basically predicting how judges or like modeling how judges actually look at debates, which is an important thing to do. The best way that you can get better at debate, one of the best ways that you can get better at debate is by thinking like a judge, like try to get inside of their brain and determine what actually makes the difference between winning and losing for them. So the idea behind this model is that it's a prediction of how judges behave. The idea is that most judges will behave as if only one argument in the round matters by the very end, and everything else is out. Everything else they don't even consider at all. So 99% of rounds, I think, can be predicted in this way that the judge will only vote for the most important argument. And the most important argument is whatever they decide. Usually it's the argument that has the better weighing, right? So for example, if one argument has weighing and the other one doesn't, and the weighing is conceded, then that becomes the only important argument in the round, not the most important, but the only important argument in the round. That is what is meant by win by one. There are a number of other like lectures on YouTube that talk about this. I'll link them in the description of this video. They're definitely worth a watch. For example, there's a debater from Blair named Eli who gave a great win by one summary lecture a while back that I think is very good. So you should go watch that. Um, but okay, if this is true, how do you win? There are two ways intuitively. Way number one is you have the most important argument, which means you have the only argument that matters. They are not able to steal it. They are not able to link in. You are able to win your argument, so you win the debate. Way number two is they have the most important argument in the round, which means the only important argument in the round. So the only way that you can win is by stealing it. Uh, People call this all sorts of things. I've put a list of terms here. It doesn't really matter. I will call it a link in because that's what a lot of PFers say. Some people get annoyed by that word. I don't really think it matters. It's all just words like all the way down. So that's what I'm going to say for now. There might be some people, there might be some cases in which this model does not hold up. It's not a perfect model. And actually, arguably, it doesn't make that much logical sense in the real world. This is not how policymakers decide things, for example. So the other model that is competing with this is this one, where you go through all of the arguments that are left at the end of the round and you add them all up, like all of the arguments on the AF and all of the arguments on the neg. And then you compare the sum total of the AF to the neg, and you determine which one has more weight in its sum total. I don't think this is almost ever actually done in a debate. And part of the reason is that the final focus is only 2 minutes, so you can only cram so many different arguments in there. But part of the reason is also like it seems deeply interventionist. I think most tech judges these days would probably want to avoid something like this. Like it just feels very vibes based, right? Like the whole point of weighing is that you're comparing two distinct arguments, but you're not like most weighing is not like my two arguments combined are able to beat their one argument. And if that is the weighing that you're doing, like I think it's very difficult to pull that off, because it's tough to toe the line, right? Like either you're doing too much work, like you didn't need to combine those two arguments. You could have just weighed one and it would have had the same result. In which case, why are you doing extra work? Or you're doing not enough work. Like just because you attack on another argument does not allow you to overcome the good weighing done by the one argument on the other side. So usually this is not a very good strategy, and therefore it is like an additional reason why this is a good model that predicts the way that most rounds will be decided. The only exception is that sometimes the fact that you have more arguments than them is like a tiebreaker. Like, for example, if neither side does weighing, then maybe as a judge, I can feel comfortable in my tabula rasa brain being like, well, they have two arguments, they have one. I will treat them all as equal weight because no one told me anything different. No one did weighing. And so two is bigger than one. I vote for them. Or if the weighing is like a deadlock, then I'll say like, okay, well, these two arguments are exactly even. So at least there's another argument on this side I can use to tiebreak them. I think that's the only exception. And really, I think this only happens in like 1 to 2% of rounds. So for the sake of PF in general, I think it is worth pretending that all rounds will be like this. And if you do pretend this, it actually changes the way that you debate quite a lot. And I will explain how I think it ought change the way that you debate. First, I will talk about what I used to think. Then I will talk about what I now think. What I used to think is that this means there are two tiers of weighing that you can do. It's not just impact calculus. That's like the top tier. That decides what the biggest argument is. That then becomes the only important argument. It is also the second tier, the link weighing, because in almost all of these rounds, teams are pretty smart. They realize that their argument might not be the only important one. It might not be that biggest one. They might lose the impact calculus, which means in a lot of these rounds, the go-to strategy is to try to link into the other side's impact, which I think is the correct way to do this. But that means that there is room for weighing on the lower layer of these arguments as well. Like if you're both linking into the same impact, then you still need to do weighing. You still need to compare the links into that impact, which is something that I called link weighing. I've also heard people in APTA call this external and internal weighing. External weighing is like between different clashes, and internal weighing is within each clash. Whatever terms work for you, I think either one, they basically say the same thing, and it's a good thing to think about. But it's not quite accurate. It's another decent heuristic, but it's not always true. And I think there's actually a more useful way to think about this, which is the crazy like conclusion that I want you to learn from this. The breakthrough that I had is not much of a breakthrough. It's just that they're not two tiers. There's like infinitely many tiers. And of course, the next slide I'm going to show you actually still has two tiers, but just wait. There's going to be more. So this slide shows you, I think, a cool model, a cool graphic that you can use to try to think about weighing in your head. This is what I think judges do. This is what I do when I think about who I'm voting for in a round. I am deciding who is the winner. And in order to decide who is the winner, I will look at the different impacts in the round, and I will determine who, through impact calculus usually, has one that their impact matters more. So I don't know, maybe this is like warming versus nuclear war or something. And I say, okay, the team A proved that warming is more important than nuclear war. Then I look inside of it. I look at all of the links that go into that argument, and I completely ignore the other side. Like the other side, it just goes away. I can't delete it because they're like connected, but I would delete it to show you. So just pretend it's gone, right? In my brain as a judge, I'm not thinking about it at all. I'm only thinking about the links that go into this impact of warming now. And then I just compare those. I say which one is my favorite. And I use whatever I can to do that. And unfortunately, because PFers don't compare these very often, a lot of that is why you get split decisions in tech panels, is because different judges have different go-to ways to compare these links. Like you'll hear one judge have a perfectly valid RFD where they say like, oh, well, the AF at least had mitigation on the neg link to the warming scenario, but there was no mitigation on the AF link to the warming scenario. And so I had to vote for the AF link because I believe that warming is the most important impact in the round. Totally valid. But then you hear the next judge turn around and say, well, I completely see your opinion, but I actually voted in a different way. I thought that the AF link was actually worse than the neg link, because even if there was mitigation on the neg link, the neg proved that the link is still like substantially bigger in scope. And so it links into a warming scenario by linking into green energy in every country, whereas the AF only links into green energy in one country. And none of these tiebreakers are done by the debaters. They're forced to be, the judges are forced to do them themselves. And so it makes complete sense that each judge would use a different one to determine who they think wins in the least interventionist way. And this is the problem. This is also the solution. The solution is if you focus on this part of the debate, then you avoid all of these 2-1 screws. You avoid all of these split panels, and you actually take back the debate into your hands. You take control of the judge's RFD, and you avoid them just making a random decision based on what tiebreaker they think is least interventionist. That's the hot take. The next part is like, yeah, it goes deeper. It's not just two layers, because there are like you can keep going back, right? Like the distinction between a link and an impact is kind of arbitrary, right? Like think about it, right? Is the impact extinction, or is the impact climate change, or is the impact fossil fuels go away? And all of those, like you can link into each of those steps, right? Like maybe multiple teams, like both of the teams have different links into fossil fuels, but also both of the teams have different independent links into warming and also different independent links into extinction. Like we can keep going back more and more layers. And I think the idea is if you go back enough layers, then you eventually just get to your side of the resolution. And the way to think about this is like you start at the end, which is why it's retrosynthetic. This is like an organic chemistry word that I use to make myself sound smart because I came up with this theory when I was in Orgo. So you start at the end. You start with, I want to be the winner, right? And so then you think, okay, what is the most important impact in the debate that can get me the win? And then you find that. You say, okay, it's this one. Then you have to think, what is the most important controlling factor that determines who wins that impact? And you say, okay, it's this one. Then you have to think one step back. What is the most important controlling factor that can control that most important controlling factor that can control the most important impact that will win me the round? And you keep asking that question. You go back and back and back and back. And if you ask that question and you get answers that go all the way back, you will eventually hit the resolution. You will hit your side, like either affirming or negating. And that is how I think you should build a case. Sometimes you get a chart that looks like this at the end of the round. So, for example, maybe the neg here, the AF has two arguments and the neg has two arguments. We'll pretend this is warming and we'll pretend this is nuclear war again. Maybe I believe that warming is the most important and it's more important than nuclear war. So I now ignore all of this. But I now have to determine which of these three is the most important. So there are two ways that the AF can win immediately right here. Number one, if I believe that this link, this direct link from the AF's first contention, has a greater access to this impact compared to this internal link to warming from the neg's contention one, then I immediately vote AF. Same thing with the second contention. If I think that the AF's second contention has the best direct link into impact one, and it's better than this internal link into impact one, then I immediately vote AF. If I believe that this internal link has a better access to this impact than either of these direct links, then I have to ask one more question as a judge. I have to ask who has a better access to this internal link. And the question is it the AF C2 or is it the neg C1? And here the AF still has another chance to win. If the AF C2 has the best access to this internal link, and this internal link has the best access to this impact, and this impact is the most important in the round, then you can see there's like a trail that's mapped out that would allow the AF to win. So this is a cool way to think about how debates go, and I think you should use it because a lot of debaters literally just stop at this. They just stop at in the first circle. They don't go any further than that, which is sloppy. I think it's not strategic, and it's not. This is like not enough round vision, because this is literally how you build round vision. Is you think of maps like this, and you think of what's going to happen at the end, and who's going to control what, and which things are the most important, and which things will just go away. So this layer, I guess, is like impact calculus, which is basically magnitude times probability. Probability is kind of funky here because it kind of works at every layer. Like maybe there's different probabilities of each part. Like there's an inherent baseline probability of the impact triggering, like given the internal links are true. There's like also like a different inherent baseline probability of each internal link, whatever. And you can sort of apply probability throughout. And you can kind of apply most of these concepts throughout, not just to the impact calculus layer, but I think that most of the time they function like at this external layer of impact calculus. You have magnitude, which is made up of scope, severity, and duration times probability. And then whichever issue area has a higher like total utility defined by magnitude times probability is going to be the one that is picked by the judge. And the other one is just ignored. But then you have to focus on the tiebreakers within that layer, like the internal weighing, right? And you can use lots of different ways to do this. You can use, well, I have better responses, or I have more responses, or I have responses at all. Like there at least is mitigation. I have better evidence, maybe like we both have reasons that this might be true or might be false, but at least I have evidence that says that my side is right. Or it just makes more sense, which is an underrated reason to prefer that we'll get into more later. And yeah, I said this before. I think this is an awesome way to actually write prep, like cases and rebuttals. Like you should be thinking about this when you're like prepping before the tournament. Like, how do you want this to end up? What is your path to winning? And by that, I think it shows you exactly what you need to do. You need to, one, decide what you want to be the most important impact. And then two, decide how can I insulate my path to that from any link-ins that they might try to give. And that is the way to win. That is how you win in PF. And I think that's probably the most important thing to think about. Like even more so than front lines. It's the first thing you should think about is how can I beat any link-ins? Not beat as in like erase them, whatever. I don't think terminal defense really exists, but beat as in outweigh the link. Like why is your link into this impact or into this internal link better than their link that they're attempting to make from their scenario? And if you think a lot about that, you will win more rounds. Problem. Sometimes both teams try to be sneaky and both teams try to link into the other team's impact. So you get a circle, right? So this is an example of a debate that I judged recently here in Taiwan. We were debating about social media. Is social media good or bad? And the AF read an argument that says, well, if there's more social media, if there is social media at all, I guess, then people will be able to post things about government decisions on social media. The government will be able to look at social media and get more insight into what policies are doing well, what policies aren't, and how they should change things. It's like it helps with the democratic process, I guess. Whereas the neg had an argument about echo chambers. You get the argument. Social media creates echo chambers. It polarizes society, and this is a bad thing. Maybe this is not a terminal impact, but like we can treat these as two issues in this debate. And then they both try to be sneaky, right? So obviously the AF strategy here is to say, well, if the government gets better, then it can solve all of the neg harms, right? And so they link it into echo chambers. They say if the government gets better because it hears about all of these problems with echo chambers on social media, then it will pass policies that remove echo chambers. And maybe even not just remove echo chambers, but like do something to actively reduce the amount of polarization in society beyond the level that it was at before social media, which means like there is offense in this argument. It's not just defense. It's not just like a short circuit. And the other side, the neg, is also deciding to be sneaky here. They say, okay, well, maybe the government is the most important, but we will link into that impact as well. We will say if there is an echo chamber and there's more polarization in society, then maybe there's more gridlock in Congress. It's a harder for the politicians who are elected to make decisions that help the people because they're all fighting about other things. There's more polarization. And now we have a problem because it's just a circle. Both sides are just trying to link into the other side, and we don't really know what's more important, and we don't really know which link-in is better. So if you are a judge, this is a nightmare. This is awful, and it requires intervention to resolve. But you don't have to put your judge in this horrible situation if you just make it simple. So this is how I think you should deal with tangles. Don't get into the middle stuff. It's gross. It's terrible. Don't look at it. Instead, you should just take the most direct, simple path. You should say, judge. Don't say judge. Don't say that. You should say, there are two questions you must ask yourself to decide this debate. The first question is which impact matters more, the government or the echo chamber, if they are true in isolation. The answer is if the government helps people, that matters more than echo chambers. It's unclear what the terminal impact of echo chambers is. Maybe there's more polarization, but that polarization at best only worsens the quality of life between some people. But government policies are literally life and death for everyone. They determine everything else that happens in society. And so whoever controls the argument about the government being better wins this debate. However, the neg can still win if they prove that the echo chamber argument is the best link into the efficacy of the government. However, that is not true. So the second question is, whose link into the government efficacy is the best? The answer is our direct link from social media is better than their link from echo chambers. Why? Because even if there are echo chambers, the government, it is better for the government to be a little bit polarized. All that does is slow it down, but its efficacy, even if slower, is still better than it otherwise would be without social media when it doesn't have any information about what the people actually believe. So the policies that do result from the government are much more likely to be beneficial and much less likely to be harmful. Whereas on their side, at best, they just get a quicker government, but that government is less likely to pass good policies and more likely to pass actively harmful policies, which means our link is a much better way to improve the overall efficacy of the government than their link about removing echo chambers. And then you're done, and then you win. You could also use other tiebreakers, like, we have evidence that this empirically made the government better, but they don't have evidence that says this on their side. So even if their argument could be hypothetically true, our argument is true on net, and we win. There are like infinite ways to do this. These are just a few. Point is, use your noggin. Next topic that I will talk about, framing. I think people do framing badly. I don't really like how a lot of people do framing. First, and maybe the biggest issue, people forget to be comparative with framing. Like framing is just weighing, guys. And everyone knows that weighing has to be comparative. You can't just talk about your argument when you're doing weighing. You have to also talk about their argument. The same is true of framing. You have to also talk about the default framing that they would use to justify their arguments when you're giving your arguments. For example, if your framing is like, prefer like disabled indigenous people over impacts to them over anyone else, then you have to explain not only why impacts to disabled indigenous people are very severe or more severe than they originally appear, but why they are more severe than the impacts that the other side talks about. I'll give one bad example and one good example. One bad example is people say structural violence is the most important because people ignore it, and so it compounds over time. Okay, well, other impacts also compound over time. Here's a better example. Structural violence is the most important because people completely ignore it, which means it has very few intervening factors. However, big arguments like the impacts that they talk about are not ignored, which means there are a million different mitigating factors, different actors who have interests in resolving those impacts that could potentially prevent them. That means there's like infinitely many different possible pieces of defense that can be applied to their impact scenario, which don't get applied to structural violence, which cumulatively mitigates it enough that it probably either A, won't happen, or B, is so small that it's much lower than the resultant impact of structural violence, which is empirically proven by our Jackson 12 evidence, which is a decent card that people use a lot. You can see the difference, right? You can hear the difference. Like the first example is just not comparative at all, and it loses straight away to literally just magnitude weighing. But the second example is actually comparative because it actually takes into account the arguments that the other side is using. That's how you do framing. How does framing work? There are two conceptions. I guess this matters, but they kind of end up being the same thing in a lot of debates. The first is maybe framing is a nib, right? Like you must get through this framing or get into this framing in order to have a winning chance in this debate. And any arguments that don't access this framing just fall out of the round. The other one is framing as a magnifier. Like if you pass through the framing, your argument like doubles or something in terms of how we should evaluate it in this debate. The important difference is that if framing is only a magnifier, then arguments that are outside of the framing can still overcome the magnified impact within the framing. Well, this is kind of intuitive. I think that framing is more of a magnifier than a nib in most rounds, but it depends. Maybe like the Mimi 2000 racism side constraint framing is more of a nib, but most of the stuff like structural violence framing is more of a magnifier. And so even if you agree that like structural violence matters exponentially more than other arguments, you can still say that their scenario within their structural violence framing is so small compared to our scenario that falls outside of structural violence that in this specific case, even their magnified argument is still smaller than our unmagnified argument. MNGG. Um, Next question. Is it just utilitarianism? This is a big, important question that people are not asking. Why are people not asking this? What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is that consequences matter, and the way that we should evaluate the weight of consequences is by using magnitude times probability. The importance of the consequence, scope, severity, duration, times the likelihood that it actually happens if we do this thing. That makes sense. Lots and lots and lots and lots of framing. Just use utilitarianism as the assumption behind the warrants for the framing. For example, I have heard framing that says we should prioritize structural violence because it compounds over time. It's like cyclical or whatever. Well, then you start scratching your head and you're like, okay, well, why is that a reason to prefer structural violence? Well, I guess if it's cyclical and it compounds over time, that makes it really big. As in it affects more people. Maybe what? Okay, well, wait, hold on. That sounds like scope. And that means like your argument is just scope weighing. And if your argument is just scope weighing, then if I do my own scope weighing that's better, I can win. Like there's nothing special about your scope weighing just because you called it framing. It's still just scope weighing. Like a lot of these framing shells or whatever the heck you want to call them are literally just like they are only claiming that the framing is true because of utilitarian considerations, which means that if you just have better utilitarian weighing, then the framing goes away. Like it doesn't have any special feature that like is like spicy utility. Like it's not different. It's just util. And so these are just arguments for why it's bigger than we otherwise would have thought under utilitarian considerations, which means you can just outweigh the framing. And it also means the best framing is not utilitarian and should not use utilitarian assumptions because that makes it very difficult to win if someone actually notices this. How to respond to framing? Three ways. Two are very underutilized. One is kind of overutilized, but I guess correctly utilized. One, you should answer their warrants. Why don't people do this? I don't know. I think in 20% of the rounds that have framing in which the framing is disputed, does one team answer the warrants in the other team's framing. These warrants are not very good, and people are getting away with not reading well-constructed warrants or smart warrants or strong warrants. I think largely because they know that the other team will hear the top of the framing, they'll hear the claim, and then they will just sort of self-combust and they will not be able to respond to the claim because they will feel like they will be canceled if they do. No, you should answer the warrants. It's still debate. Second, this is the overrepresented one, but it's pretty good. You should link into the framing if you are able to. Problem is that good framing and teams that read framing in a smart way will just be ready for this, right? Like this goes back to all of this stuff with retrosynthetic weighing. Like the benefit of framing is forcing the other team to debate on your playing field that you are more prepared to beat them on. Like if you're running framing and you're surprised that they try to link in, then I'm sorry, but you're not doing it right. Like the number one thing that you should expect if you are running framing is that the other team will attempt to link in. And so the number one thing that you should prep is ways to beat their link ins or, prove that your link into the framing is stronger than their link into the framing. And if you are up against a team that is smart, that is reading framing, then linking in should usually be a losing strategy. For some reason, teams don't seem to be that smart reading framing, so it is a winning strategy for now. But I think when teams get smarter, it will lose quite a lot. The last one is just beat the magnified argument. This is the other one I was talking about earlier. Like sometimes you could just say, yes, the framing is true. It means your argument is way more important than we all thought, but it's still not more important than mine. There's kind of two brands of framing that I think exist. One of them is the hyper-specific framing, right? Like the framing that I debated at Nats in my senior year on the charter schools topic, which was like only evaluate impacts to ESL students. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm teaching ESL students right now. They have a lot of struggles and it's important to help them. And they probably get like, you know, the resources that are allocated to them are too little. They don't get focused on enough. But I don't know that we should like exclusively talk about helping them in a topic that is about all education for like public schools. Like that seems a little bit extreme, right? So if it's hyper specific, I think that is incredibly difficult to make the claim convincingly that we should exclusively talk about this subset of impacts. And therefore it should be quite easy to answer the warrants. You just have to try and not like, you know, be too scared of doing it that you just self-combust. However, a lot of framing is very broad instead. So for example, the things that people in PF call structural violence or extinction framing or things like that, these things are so easy to link in that it is almost not even worth introducing them into the round. They're that easy to link into. I think almost every impact, like probably every impact ever links into structural violence if you just think about it pretty hard. And the reason why is because I think people are running structural violence framing in the wrong way. Um, I guess that's what I'll talk about next. Structural violence framing. Why is it not a good argument right now? And how can you make it into a good argument? Why is it not a good argument right now? Well, people are running structural violence framing, I think, in the wrong way. They are running it to talk about impacts that disproportionately harm marginalized groups. Problem. That's every impact. I'm sorry, but I cannot think of a single impact that does not disproportionately harm marginalized groups. If anyone has one, I comment it. I think that I can come up with a reason why any impact disproportionately harms marginalized groups, which means everything links in, like basically equally. And if something does not seem to link in because it's a positive impact, right? Like benefiting the economy only helps the rich. Well, you just need to spin the argument as the avoidance of the counterfactual instead to link in, right? Like, no, no, no. Our argument is not about benefiting the economy and making people rich. Our argument is about avoiding the worsening of the economy. And then that's a negative impact that falls disproportionately on marginalized people, which means everyone should be able to link into this lickety split. How do you run this in a better way? The better structural violence framework is to actually link into the structures and not the instances of violence that occur within those structures. We should be interrogating the root cause, not of the violence, not the root cause of, I don't know, climate change hurting Black people. And we like the root cause of that is obvious. It's like fossil fuel companies, whatever. The root causes that we should be interrogating are the root causes of the vulnerability, the root causes of what makes these people marginalized, the structures in society that keep them vulnerable to every impact. And that, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like if you were able to resolve some of the structures that structurally increase their vulnerability to every impact, then it's obvious that the weighing is then easy, right? Like your impact is just one instance of violence that happens to fall hardest on marginalized people. But our argument is the only way that we can ensure that every impact in the future, not just the one that you talk about, but including the one that you talk about, does not disproportionately harm these people at least as much. So if you can resolve a structure of violence, like a reason that people are structurally more vulnerable to all types of impacts, then you get access to all types of impact. You get access to a cumulative impact of vulnerability into the future that does seem to operate in a different playing field than theirs. And then the hard part is just finding that link. Like, what is that structure that you link into? Because not a lot of topics actually have proper structural violence links, more than you might expect, actually, but less than every topic. And so you need to do your work to think about that. For example, this is a great example. This is such a good example. Nuclear waste is not structural violence. Nuclear waste on indigenous land is not structural violence. It is an example of violence that occurs within a structure, but it is not a structure. like increasing nuclear energy does not create new structures of oppression. It operates within existing structures of oppression to create disproportionate impacts on marginalized groups, which means this is not an example of a good link for proper structural violence framing, in my opinion. There are examples in these documents that I think are helpful. Some are helpful to avoid, and some are helpful because they are good examples. It is up to you to decide which one is which. This one I think is a decent example, but it's like oh, actually, yeah, this one's a decent example. It's like quite layered. There's a lot of stuff in here that's pretty cool. This was on the student loans topic I wrote. I don't think it was ever a position that was actually broken, Pry. But it's cool. I think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if it was broken, because I think it's an interesting take on an example of hyper-specific framing that is intentionally strategically set up to beat any link-ins. And that's how you should run framing. It should be like as difficult for them to link in as possible, and simultaneously as easy to defend the warrants of the framing as possible. And then you win. Next one, extinction. Extinction framing is the other really popular one these days, although it's actually like ironically falling out of popularity because it's so common that you don't need framing. And like it's kind of unstrategic to run extinction framing because everything is extinction now, so you don't get a net advantage over your opponents. But it's kind of I think worth it to think about how to answer extinction framing. It's not too difficult. Like most of it is just like future lives don't matter. That justifies like crazy positions that say like asexual people are less valuable humans. And also like the probability is in fact quite low. But even that one you don't need. Like really what you need is like extinction calculus and like the extremes of utilitarianism probably justify terrible atrocities. And also everything links into extinction. Yeah. Um, you go watch my video on extinction if you want to learn more about this, about how to run it well and about how to respond to it well. This is one of the most important parts of this lecture. How do we weigh when we have an extinction versus extinction debate? Because the answer is not we don't. And the answer is also not time frame, which is what a lot of people are using. Like, oh my gosh. Some people have started talking about this formula, this like secret formula that PFers are using, which is my argument is extinction and it happens first. So it's like a prerequisite. Like if everyone dies, then your argument can't happen. Bada bing, bada boom, I win, right? No, wrong. Like all of these arguments require the premise that like impacts either happen or they don't. And they all require the premise that like if an argument is conceded, it's 100% true. First of all, go watch part 1 of this video. That's not a true premise. But second of all, like there's so much room for comparing links to extinction without using time frame. Why? Why is time frame not a good way to compare links to extinction? The most obvious reason is actually extinction framing itself mathematically proves why time frame is like it is such a inconsequential argument that its ability to sway the round approaches zero. Bostrom, for example, his whole calculation is that any risk of extinction, anytime, it doesn't matter when, he's agnostic about when it happens, uh, is a huge, like momentously huge, astronomically huge impact because of the effect on potential future generations. That's how he gets all of his math, right? So the future generations are exponential, as in, if we go extinct now, we lose out on the next generation and the generation after and the next 10 trillion generations that come after that, which means it doesn't really matter if it's this generation or the next generation that goes extinct. It doesn't matter if we go extinct now or in 100 years. Like that, the only difference there is like the amount of people who would be born between those two periods of time, which really does not, it's not a drop in the bucket compared to the quadrillions and quadrillions. Like the fact of it being extinction is infinitely more important than when it happens. Why does this matter? It matters because your argument is not that we guarantee extinction. It's that extinction has a higher chance. And so obviously, I think this should be so clear. A 0.000000001% difference in the chance of extinction should absolutely, to use Roy's words, mollywop any difference in time frame by any amount of years. Which means mathematically, the probability comparisons in which link is more likely to lead to extinction are on a categorically higher playing field than any time frame comparisons. Hopefully you followed that. I think it's just like time frame is a bad way to tie break this. So what can you do instead? Here are three that are okay, but I don't love them. One, internal link comparisons. Nuclear war is more likely to lead to extinction than climate change. This is not, it doesn't require impact defense. You don't have to read a card that says, nuclear war doesn't cause extinction because of bunkers. You just think of reasons why it's more survivable, and then you use those. This, I think, can be strong if you do it right. I don't know. Like, I would like people to say, like, 4 reasons why nuclear war is more likely to cause extinction than warming. GG. The second one is uniqueness comparisons. Like, try or die is a decent one, right? Like, maybe your argument has a higher chance of extinction than my argument has of reducing the chance of extinction. But it's try or die. We're gonna have extinction right now if we don't do anything. So even if like it's very likely that I create like a 90% chance of extinction, I'll take those odds if the alternative is like a 99% chance of extinction. The last one is strength of link, which is even worse. I think it's just like I've got a response to your link and you don't have any response to my link, so my extinction link is better than yours. Get out of here. The best one is logic. This is what you should use. If you like, this is okay. Some people are going to watch this and are going to be like, logic? That's not a weighing mechanism. What are you talking about? I get it, right? Like, it's really easy to put these, like, take these, like, oh, gimme, internal link comparison, uniqueness comparison, strength of link comparison, and you have all these tools in your tool belt. And logic is like, it feels too soft and slippery to put in your tool belt. But it's the best one. You just gotta use your brain. The actual answer is that it depends on the context of the debate. You should take the entire context of the argument into account. You should talk about scope of link, like my argument triggers multiple different risks of extinction, but yours only talks about one. Things like probability, multiplicative duration, like maybe climate change is more likely to cause extinction than nuclear war because your argument is only one event that might create extinction, but my argument has a chance of extinction every year, which cumulatively adds up to have a higher probability of extinction overall than your argument. Just think with your brain and you will find them. And I promise this is the best way you can compare extinction links. The worst thing you can do is just go for defense and say, oh, well, I win my argument, but they don't win their argument. I frontlined better than they did. I win. You should weigh. Weighing is important. We need to learn to do this again. Even if their argument is true, my argument is better. And you don't need to concede that extinction will happen to concede that their argument is true. You just concede that they have a chance that extinction happens. And you also do on your side. Okay. Next one, don't forget about context. You really should not be weighing nuclear war against climate change. You should be weighing like the entirety of the argument against their entirety of the argument. Like even just thinking about the weighing in this way should yield different thoughts. If I see nuclear war versus climate change, the way that I would go about comparing them is very different than if I see nuclear war caused by a few countries getting nukes for the first time and accidentally launching them, or even like this is worded wrong, like nuclear war having a slightly higher chance because of is the better way to word this, because of a few countries getting nukes for the first time and accidentally launching them versus nuclear war being slightly more probable in 200 years because of countries fighting over dwindling resources accelerated by the marginal amount of climate change increased by their side. And now I feel like you should be thinking of different ways to compare them. You need to remember the context when you compare even extinction links. Cool. Now, my favorite part of this lecture, non-utilitarian frameworks. I don't know who decided in policy and PF not really an LD, but in policy and PF especially, that like utilitarianism is just the default. Um, what if it's not? Again, utilitarianism is we should do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Like basically, an action is good if it helps more people than it hurts, and that's it. Um, but I don't know. Like, I think there's more to it. And I think that there's more to it that doesn't have to be some weird indite or IVI or K or something. Like, why are we only saving these cool arguments for like the most weird technical like perversions of debate? That's an exaggeration. No shade to like indites or Ks, some shade to IVIs. But I think that these arguments have the ability to stand alone without these things. And I hope that the rest of this lecture can prove that to you thoroughly. All right, what am I talking about? The first step is why do we need anything other than utilitarianism? What is lacking about utilitarianism that requires us to seek another framework? This is like our uniqueness, right? Like maybe these are the harms and the other frameworks are the solvency, whatever. There are problems with utilitarianism. The first two are just intuitions here. They're kind of just questions for you to probe utilitarianism a little bit. Utilitarianism seems to only focus on the ends, as in the end result, the consequences produced by an action. But actions also have means, right? Like there are lots of different paths that you can take to get to the same consequences. And it seems like maybe there is something about the actions that you take, the intentions behind those actions, for example, that changes the ethics or the desirability of doing the action in the first place. Also, what about agency? Is it okay to violate people's agency in order to produce good ends? We can think about this in a lot of different ways, and you probably have different answers depending on how we think about this. For example, experiment one. Is it okay to lie to someone to protect someone from dying? Probably, yeah. That seems like an okay violation of agency. Experiment two. Is it okay to enslave 10 people to produce a bunch of amazing technology that will help the rest of society get really rich and avoid poverty? Probably not. I don't know. When we start talking about the S word, slavery, it feels very intuitively bad. I don't think that this is good at all. This seems like messed up. But maybe the ends are good, right? Like I don't think there's any denying that the end was like, okay, 10 people are incredibly unhappy, but maybe a million people are incredibly happy. Does that justify it? I don't know. I don't think so. I still don't think so. Um, there's a great poem. Oh gosh, who is it by? The Omelas thing. The ones who walk away from Omelas. Go read this. It's good. Some other thoughts about utilitarianism. Here are like the real critiques. Critiques with a C, not with a K. Sorry, K lovers. One, joy box. If there was a chair that I could sit in that would like inject me continuously with drugs that make me hallucinate, like great things that make me really happy, I just get like injected with pure happiness all my life. Is this a good thing? Would I sit in the chair? I think not. I kind of want to do things that I think are meaningful instead of just joyful. So maybe hedonism, which is a part of a lot of utilitarianism, just like more happiness for more people, maybe it's not really true. There is reason to doubt it. Space lizard thought experiment. I love this space lizard. I am telling you, there is a lizard in space. This lizard in space gets infinitely happy, astronomically happy, happier than all of the people who have ever lived and all of their happiness combined with none of their sadness. And he only gets, I don't know why it's a he, this space lizard only gets infinitely happy when you go on a killing spree and go kill old sad people. That's not that much of a loss. These people are going to die pretty soon anyway, and they're sad anyway. They're living like pretty bad lives. So why not? Why not do it? It's infinite happiness. You don't know for sure that the space lizard exists, but you have my word for it. And that's some evidence, right? Even if you think my word is very wrong, it's 0.1% true, or it's 0.0001% true. Extinction calculus logic still got to do it. Seems like a repugnant conclusion for utilitarianism. Maybe there's something else. Jam tomorrow problem. I wrote a whole paper on this. I'll link that in the description of this video. It's kind of hard to describe. The best way I've heard it described is if you buy extinction calculus, which you must if you buy utilitarianism, and you're a long-termist, as in you're kind of agnostic to like a million people dying in 10 years is the same as a million people dying now, is the same as a million people dying in 100 years. Then you should like if I told you there was a way for us to reduce the chance of extinction by 1 whole%, that's a lot for someone who believes in an extinction framework. But the way to do it requires everyone currently on Earth to live actively bad lives, lives full of suffering to the point where they are lives that are not worth living. I mean, if you're a utilitarian, you say, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. 1% reduction in the chance of extinction, that's worth like a billion times a billion human lives. I'm totally happy having everyone on the planet doomed to a life of suffering in order to have a 1% reduction in the risk of extinction. Problem. I offer you this choice again for every future generation. I say, utilitarian, I'll give you a deal. I will tell you, you can push a button to make sure that the next generation that comes after us, they do the same deal. They live lives full of suffering in order to reduce the chance of extinction by 1%. You would totally take that deal. You would 100% in an instant, you would slap that button because you're a utilitarian and extinction calculus is true. But you would also hope that the next generation slaps the button too. And you would hope that the generation after that slaps the button too, because it's arbitrary to draw a distinction between you and them, right? Like there's no line, there's no generation at which it becomes utilitarianly good to not push the button. Like you should always hope that there is a button presented to them and they push it and they all suffer. Which means you should hope that you preserve the existence of humanity only for everyone to suffer, which is actively contrary to utilitarianism. Oh, seems like a contradiction in utilitarian thinking that's quite difficult to resolve. Next one, happy murderer. This one's simple. There's a murderer. They get happy when they kill people. They only kill people who are sad. Is it okay? Nah. Then maybe you're not a utilitarian. Killer doctor. This is my go-to when I'm trying to warrant like different frameworks on the fly. I would say, imagine you are a perfectly healthy patient going in for a checkup to a doctor. You would not want your doctor to kill you and take all of your organs to save 5 dying patients. One of them needs your kidney, one of them needs your heart, whatever. Even if this is good, this saves more lives on net. You kill one person, you save 5 people. Still seems like kind of a fucked up thing to do. The next one is baby machines. This is like a bit of a double bind for utilitarians, which is either you think that some people should be killed because they live such bad lives that it would be better for the world that they should die. That seems kind of fucked up. That's not very respecting of agency of you. Or you think no one lives such a bad life that they should die, which means you think everyone lives at least somewhat good lives that contribute to the utility of the universe, the like cumulative sum of goodness. So you think that everyone should just make babies all day. And you think that it's actively bad, is actively like depriving the world of utility to not be making babies all day, which seems kind of fucked up to me, even if those babies live lives of suffering. The last one is the life expectancy calculations are kind of gross, right? Like if you really hardcore subscribe to utilitarianism, then like not only would you like, you would save a baby over an old person every time because the baby has like more of a life to live. But it gets so much worse than that, right? Like if you had to pick between killing a rich person and a poor person, you would kill the poor person because it's A, likely that they live a slightly worse life, and B, it's more likely that their life expectancy is lower than the rich person. But then it gets even grosser, right? Like you might calculate that you should kill like 100 poor people to save one rich person. This seems like it gets out of hand, right? Like intuitively, I think this starts breaking down, even though the utilitarian calculus, it always holds up. Meaning, there are a lot of problems with utilitarianism, and there is room for something else to answer them. Here are some more, a couple ones from my former APTA partner, Rocket. One of them is like poetry versus ice cream. This is also a critique of hedonism. It's like, I don't really know if these things are comparable. Can you compare the happiness that you get from eating ice cream to the happiness that you get from hearing poetry? It seems like they're just different. And also, maybe there's an argument that an ethical system is only worth debating and worth proposing if it is something that people can reasonably follow and adhere to in their like day-to-day life. And utilitarianism does not seem to be that. It's like way too demanding. Like you should donate yourself into poverty. You should like, you know, you could go to a blood drive and donate 1 liter of blood and save 3 people. Or you could donate all of your blood and save a million people, you know? It seems like you should all die in order to help other people, which I don't know. Doesn't seem like it's, all of your followers of your ideology are going to die. So it doesn't seem like it's very practical, which might be something that matters. And also, like, there's a bunch of problems with predictions and infinite value, etc. There's a million icky problems with utilitarianism. There are also some just problems with consequentialism in general, which utilitarianism is one brand of consequentialism, which is just like we're concerned about the outcomes of the actions, the ends, not just the means, or not the means at all. One of the coolest responses to consequentialism is just like it's very hard to predict things. You might have heard like chaos theory or butterfly effect. These are terms that get thrown around. This is a card that people read that I think is actually somewhat good. It's this dude from 2005 who says like cards are kind of bad, guys. Like it's hard to predict things, and not just that, but all of the experts and the specialists that my opponents are citing to predict things, they are rewarded by our system for bad judgments and for like saying flashy things that make headlines. And so, in fact, there is even more reason to doubt them, which means there's no reason to believe that A will lead to B, like their argument suggests. So we already went over how the baseline probability of arguments is clearly not 100%. It's usually somewhat low. This guy would imply that the baseline probability of a lot of these arguments that require this kind of link chain prediction is like approaching zero, which is an extra reason that we maybe should care more about these other like inherent arguments about the morality of things. I've heard that there are like, okay, I've heard that there are new cards, like other people have written stuff like opinion articles that say this guy specifically is wrong, but I don't know how wrong. Like, I don't know how much to believe that either. Like, he seems to be onto something here. Like, for example, I majored in chemistry, but I also majored in international relations or international affairs at Brown. And one of the biggest takeaways that I had from reading like a million things for a PhD class, subtle flex, all of them agree. There's one thing they all agree on, which is that international relations theories should not be used to predict foreign policy outcomes. That is the one thing they all agree on. And if the entire field of international relations agrees on that, then it seems like I feel like this guy's got a point, no? We're pretending a little bit too much in debate that it is possible to predict like the effects of US domestic policy on like China or something. So food for thought and food for non-utilitarian philosophy. A couple last tangents, two last tangents before we really get into the meat and potatoes. The first one is a tangent on intuition pumps. You might hear all of this on this slide, and you might be sitting there tapping your foot and being like, when is he going to get to the technical stuff? All of this is just rhetoric. Oh, morality. Oh, who cares about morality? Utilitarianism is clearly technically correct, even if there's like intuition stuff. This is just like vibes. Yes, it is vibes. Correct. Vibes are an argument. Two things to say here. One, let's be consistent. You already do this. You already use intuition pumps, which just means intuitions. in PF all the time. When you indict an author or you indict a framework and you say this logic that you're using justifies atrocity, you technically didn't prove why atrocities are important, right? Like, where's the technical warranting for your weighing? And when you indict an author for being a white supremacist, again, like, you didn't technically explain why being a white supremacist is bad, or why being a white supremacist means that we shouldn't take this author's thoughts for granted or something. But there's a point at which we all agree that intuitions work, and they have a place in debate. And they don't just have a place in lay debate, or whatever distinction you want to draw. They have a place in all debate, in technical debate, in determining the actual truth of the matter. Yes, it is judge intervention. That's what intuitions require. But all debate is judge intervention. Judge intervention is inevitable. It is necessary. It is useful in debate. Almost all philosophy also like uses intuition pumps. Like, I don't know. Some people they think, oh, all of these are just like they're just vibes. But I have like my man Immanuel Kant has like the real technical warrants. No, he doesn't. The field of philosophy uses the term repugnant conclusions, which is just an intuition pump. It's just like this logic justifies bad things that are intuitively bad. Is a term of art. Like it's something that is used by logic papers to disprove the logic of other people. So I don't see why they get to use it, and it's technical enough for the professionals, and it's not technical enough for some high schoolers doing debate about like nuclear energy. Um, the last argument against this is like, oh, well, intuitions are bad because everyone has different intuitions, right? Like you might think that killing people is wrong, but actually I think killing people is fine. So there's some debate between like extreme epistemic humility or like extreme cultural relativism versus like dogmatism and absolutism. The answer is, I think, quite obviously somewhere in the middle. And somewhere in the middle means that we do still have room for using intuitions. There's an idea called like an overlapping consensus that yes, on lots of things, different cultures, different people, different subjectivities, they have different ideas about them. But there are some things that are like that seem to be moral truths, and to some extent, we require a belief in moral truths that we come to sort of a consensus about in order to even have a system of morality or ethics that can guide our actions in the first place. So intuitions are good and you should use them more, and they are technical. Tangent number 2. This is a big one. I have heard from a few little birdies that some people are using more philosophy in public forum, things like Kant. But oh God, I hate how they're doing it. This is an opinion. And I also have not seen how they're doing it. I've only heard from other people how they're doing it. So I actually don't know. This should not be taken personally. I just don't think that you should read only cards. Like exclusively cards seems to be how this is being introduced. Like all of the debate about philosophy, why is it all just talking about the quotes that old white dudes said like hundreds of years ago? That seems terrible. That seems awful. You should think for yourself. If this is something that you want to do, you should think about if it makes sense in your own head. You should put it in your own words. You should not read cards for philosophy. I don't know why reading cards for philosophy is good. Like, this is not an empirical argument. No one knows what's right. Like, there are a million indicts to every philosopher who's ever lived because every other philosopher writes why they're wrong. I don't know why these people are smarter than you or me. Like, all they're doing is thinking really hard. Like, what? Do they get more credibility because they've thought harder than you or me? Like, that seems wrong. That seems like that's not what we want in debate. The whole point of debate is to encourage you to think, not to encourage you to spit out the words of this random philosopher 100 years ago, which, by the way, I'm very concerned that people are hiding behind esotericism in order to trick opponents and judges into believing that they have a legitimate argument that makes sense. This freaking sentence right here makes no sense. If you read this, if you freaking highlight, especially if you highlight like random words, oh my God, it is incoherent. There are quotes from Immanuel Kant that have an annotation in the book, and the annotation says, "No one knows what this means." No one knows what this sentence means. There are scholars who spend literally their entire career interpreting Immanuel Kant and telling other philosophers that they read it wrong. Like university students who major in philosophy spend entire classes trying to understand this and they still don't know. Like there's not, oh my gosh. I just don't, I think people are citing these philosophers because they sound smart and they are difficult to understand. And that is a recipe for an argument that is hard to answer. But it is also a recipe for a debate that is useless. Useless. You can use debate to evolve your own moral compass and think harder about the way that you interact with ethics in your day-to-day life. But it only happens. And it's only, guys, it's only fun if you do it. It's only fun if you do it. You are the one who has to think about these things. And if you do it, it's fun. And if you don't actually understand your cards, then you are a problem. That's so dramatic. You're sucking the fun out of the activity for yourself and others. So don't do that. There are better ways of debating. Cool. Here's the meat and potatoes that I have promised you. A bountiful feast for your debate platter. Deontology is an argument about the means instead of just the ends of the argument. The basic technical construction of this argument follows this. Again, credit to a lot of apta people at Brown, especially my former partner. The idea is every agent acts for purposes that they regard as good. Value doesn't exist in the abstract. The only way that value exists in the world is because we value things. I might like Brussels sprouts, and so they're valuable to me, but you might hate them, so they're not valuable to you. But it all depends on our ability to endow them with value, which is our ability to choose what we like, which means that freedom and well-being are necessary conditions of action. So freedom and well-being are necessary goods. They are necessary for anything to have value in the first place. So every agent has a right to these conditions. If not, then you would have to believe that it is permissible for someone to deprive you of these rights. But then you would have to hold simultaneously that you have these rights because you're doing this action, right? And that you may not because, you are just another person. And so you would have to believe that other people could also violate your rights, which would mean you don't have these rights. That's a contradiction. And every agent must recognize that others have the same rights by virtue of the above argument. There's no morally relevant distinctions between agents. Like, who cares? There's nothing about you that makes you special. So this argument is a logical shell that explains why we ought respect the agency of other actors when we make actions in order for them to have logical coherency. Intuitively, I think this also sort of makes this is the technical stuff, whatever. There's also intuitions behind this. You should ask yourself this question: do people have rights under your framework? If you are a hardcore util supporter and you're looking at this lecture and you're like, what the heck is this dude saying? Do you like having rights? Are rights important to you? I think they're important. I think actions do include both means and ends in their ethical nature. If the means that are taken to produce positive ends violate inalienable rights, then I think that action is not good. It's excluded from the category of permissible actions. This is kind of an idea that gets thrown around in technical debate a little bit. Permissible means are you allowed to do it ethically? Like it comes prior to the questions about if it's good. It's just are we allowed to do it? Is it ethically okay to do this? Even if it could create a good thing later. The first step, is it something where does it fall in the category of actions that are okay for us to do? And if it doesn't, then, well, you're not allowed to do it, even if it would produce good ends, even if it would help people, for example. If rights can be suspended to generate positive outcomes, they aren't really rights. They aren't really inalienable, are they? So where's the line? Why? These are questions that you should ask when you're thinking about ethics. Oh boy, here's my favorite part. Examples. So here are 3 examples. Then I'm going to give you another example, which is a speech and not just a doc. Docs are bad. Speeches are good. This is one from PF that I wrote. This was on the, not the ICC, the UNSC topic, TOC last year, I think, or 2 years, some amount of years ago. There was a topic about the United Nations Security Council. No, wait. Yes? No. I read this argument on both of those topics. I forgot about this, or I coached this argument. I wrote this argument for both of those topics. Sorry. This was on that topic, but it was also on a different topic, which was about US diplomacy in West Asia. So the argument here was sanctions are used by the US when it does diplomacy, and sanctions are immoral. As in they're an impermissible action to take, even if they generate positive ends, even if they generate, a net decrease in suffering, for example, because they intentionally and predictably kill innocent people in the process. And I had this great card that like really sells it, right? Like sanctions are subject to the same moral objections as siege. They intentionally harm the most vulnerable. They are functioning as the modern equivalent of siege. They deprive the most vulnerable and least political sectors of society of the food, water, medical care, and fuel necessary for basic human needs and survival. And then, oh, this was great, right? Like, whoo, he has some zingers here that help us sell it at the rhetorical level. And we also got this, I put in the little doctor analogy to sort of sell it at the technical level, at least a little bit with some intuition pumps. Um, and so it's a pretty cool example that you could use in PF. There's a round on YouTube of me judging a team. I think it was an Edina team that attempted something similar. Like the argument I think was almost the same. It was like sanctions are bad. Ends don't justify the means. But they didn't really have any warrant for anything. Like they didn't even have like the doctor thought experiment. They didn't have any of this, right? They just had a card that said ends don't justify means. And they thought, oh, because it's a card, that surely that's enough. But I said no. That sentence is not sufficient to prove that your framework is correct. But something like this, I think, might be. Lots of examples in APTA. Here's one that I read on some teams and like one off of a few times. Most of it is, we called it principle. It's just philosophy stuff. All of this is just layers and layers of philosophy and framing and weighing. I think it's interesting. There's also some like cool animal rights stuff in here as a bonus. So interesting to look at if you, oh, look, there's all sorts of stuff down here. If you are interested in more applied examples of these frameworks, then go look at it. The question though is like, okay, this is all well and good. Here's how you make the argument, but how do you weigh it and like sell it at the end of the debate? Well, fortunately for you, I've gone back through a lot of like speech docs that I use for different like usually last speeches and after rounds to weigh lots of different non-utilitarian philosophy arguments. And so this is a lot of the rhetoric that I would use to try to sell it. But I have something even better for you today. I have an example of an actual speech. I will use this sanctions argument. I will give you a summary that attempts to explain why you, a technical PF judge, should vote for this argument, even if you are skeptical. Because lots of people, this is the biggest problem, right? Like people see this and they say, oh, this is cool, but I'm never going to read this because PF judges would never vote for this. PF judges would totally hack against this. PF judges are so set in their ways. And also utilitarianism is probably good. There's probably a reason why all the good PF teams are not doing this. And so I will just fall in line and follow suit. No, no. You can win off of anything, any innovation, if you sell it correctly. So I will give you an example of how to do it. First, I'll teach you how. You really want to appeal to the judge. What does the judge want? The judge wants to seem technical. They want to not squirrel. They want to seem technical. They want to receive the least amount of backlash for their RFD. They want the coaches that are, that are hearing from their students complain after the round to not judge them for being a bad judge, for example. So you want to appeal to all of those fears. So you appeal to their being tabula rasa. Say like, if you're really tabula rasa, you have to vote for this. You should use technical sounding justifications to help you with this. Concessions are a great way, right? Like, oh, they could have made all these good responses, but they didn't. So it's not that you have to vote for this argument per se. It's that you vote against them for making the mistakes of not handling this argument correctly. And you have to use a mix of the story of the round. This is all of the good like rhetoric, like, oh, think of the children. and then also mix it with the story of the argument. Like, they have made a fundamental mistake in this round. They don't understand how this functions. It's a fundamentally higher layer. It's categorically different from the arguments that they're making. That kind of stuff. Um, those two combined make the best sell. And so now I will give you an example of how I think you can do this. All right, I'm gonna get ready. Okay, you ready? I'm gonna time this. Hopefully it's gonna be 3 minutes. So a proper PF summary. And I hope by the end of this speech, you as a PF judge will be convinced to vote for me. All right. We will concede every word that they have said in this debate. Give them everything. It is still not enough to justify sacrificing innocent civilians. We are going for sanctions. Our argument is simple. Sanctions consistently, predictably, and intentionally starve hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children to death in the name of U.S. diplomacy. They have categorically mishandled the framing. They are right. It is good to take actions that help people, but they are wrong that every action that helps people is good. Our position is that some ways of going about generating positive benefits in the world are categorically impermissible. They fall outside of the category of actions that we are ethically permitted to take. The ends do not justify the means. Their arguments are a series of lullabies that George Bush uses to stop his atrocities from haunting him at night. Don't worry, it had to be done. The math works out. It was the right thing to do. Those children had to die so that others could survive. Is that what you're going to tell the victims? None of their responses apply. You cannot answer a means-based argument with an ends-based one, even if the likely result of this impermissible action is for others to engage in fewer impermissible actions. That doesn't make this action permissible. You aren't allowed to commit war crimes in the name of ending war crimes. You can't burn down my house to spread peace and love. I am an agent. I deserve autonomy. I deserve respect. I deserve not to be instrumentalized. The people of Syria deserve not to be instrumentalized for the US's peacekeeping agenda. Human lives aren't just numbers. These are real people. Put away your calculator and look me in the eyes. This is first on your ballot. They have conceded the layering. A doctor wouldn't be justified in killing a healthy patient to save 5 dying ones, and you aren't justified in endorsing a policy that sacrifices 100,000 civilians, even if it saves millions more. This is not just rhetoric. Extend the technical formula. Value doesn't exist in the abstract. It requires agency to endow things with value. So respect for agency is a precondition to value. There are no morally relevant distinctions between actors. Denying this framework leads to logical contradiction, since you must simultaneously believe that you must have these rights in order to take the action of the resolution, while simultaneously believing that you must not have these rights. Logic is a side constraint on all ethical frameworks. All of this is conceded. The only way to justify a ballot for them is to intervene, to point out some flaw in this argument that they did not point out, to pretend that it makes no sense and to default to util. But who are you to say that util is the default? Who are you to dogmatically resolve centuries of philosophical debate with your own opinion? If you at all identify as a technical judge, you should be voting for us with the cleanest decision of your life. Woo. Calm down, bro. But I do think that is a winning speech. I know it's like, as much as it's sort of overboard, it sells it. It sells it with the story of the round. It sells it with the story of the argument. And it sells it to a technical PF judge. I think it would be difficult for a technical PF judge to listen to that and say, nah, yeah, unless there's like, I don't know, in this hypothetical round, like maybe I've made a terrible mistake and I like conceded some response. But I think that speech is winning. So you should do something like that. Like that's how you do it. There is a way to do this that is winning, and you should do it. I don't need any cards. Like, I wasn't citing Kant or whatever. I wasn't saying extend the Kant card. I don't have to deal with any indicts of my like dumb philosophy authors who like happened to commit war crimes when they were writing stuff. I just give my own argument. I use technical warrants, and then I use a bunch of ballot directive language at the end, and then bada bing, bada boom. It's the most important argument in the round, and I win. Last thing, just a few other examples. Deontology is not all there is. There's a lot of other frameworks. I'm not the best person to talk about all of this. There's like a million other debaters who know philosophy better than I do. I didn't major in philosophy or anything. But here's some other ones that are cool examples. One is constitutivism. So the last argument was about deontology, like the means of our actions. This one is about ontology, which is like who we are, like our identity, for example. And there are some obligations that might stem from your identity. A good example of this is like there was a hilarious debate round at APTA Nationals that I did a few years ago, where the team that we were against in APTA, the pro team gets to decide the topic. It's kind of broken. But they had a topic that said, as a prison abolition group, you should support prison reform. And our strategy going in was to say, prison reform might be good. It might be great for prisoners. It might be great for racial justice. It might be great for everyone. But probably what prison reform looks like is antithetical to abolition. Now, for example, prisons are overcrowded, so build more of them. Then they're less overcrowded. That's an example of reform. We need more staff so that they have better monitoring. That's an example of reform. We need bigger prisons so that they have more space for things like rehab. We need more cells in order to reduce the overcrowding in each cell. We need more guards in order to like make sure that that there aren't as many incidents where like there is violence because there aren't enough guards. All of those things are examples of prison reform. They're also examples of prison expansion, right? They're exactly the opposite of the definition of abolition. And so the argument that we made was, even if prison reform is great, you, the actor in this debate, are a prison abolition movement. Like that's what you are, the prison abolition movement. And so it might be that every other movement for racial justice, the movement for prison rights or whatever, all of those movements definitely should support prison reform, but you can't. It is antithetical to who you are as a movement. Maybe all of your members should quit your movement and then move to a different movement and then support prison reform. But if you support prison reform, and we are right, and we win this argument that prison reform is antithetical to abolition, is the opposite of abolition, then you are no longer the prison abolition movement. Definitionally, like it stems directly from the definition of your being, of your identity. And so this is like a precondition to everything else. And then there's a bunch of other ways you can tag on this. Like all of the other ethical frameworks depend on other questions that are harder to answer, like infinite recursive value questions. But this one stems directly from the definition of who you are. It's kind of like a bit of a, like a good hammer is a hammer that hammers nails well situation. You can apply this to PF with some like constitution arguments, like maybe the constitution is like the code of the federal government. And so if you break it, you are like definitionally, like you give up the identity of the agent, the federal government, because you give up what gives you the jurisdiction to make this resolution in the first place. And so it's like, you're not allowed to, even if it's good, you're just not allowed to, because that's not what the government is. This also can be applied to like theory questions, like jurisdiction. Like there are two ways to make jurisdiction as an argument. One is like an appeal to fairness, right? It may be more fair to follow the rules because they're predictable. But you don't need this. You can make another jurisdiction argument that uses constitutivism that says like, even if it is more fair to break the rules, maybe the rules are totally screwed up and they're unfair, it doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. They are what defines public forum as public forum. So it's kind of like, maybe it would be cooler if in soccer you could pick up the ball with your hands, even if you prove that, like, you're not playing soccer anymore. So even if you violate the rules of PF and that makes you better, it makes the event better, you're not doing PF anymore. So you're not winning a PF round. So the judge can't vote for you. It's just a definitional question. It's not a question of value. There's also stuff about reparative obligations. Like if we hurt someone, then we have more of an obligation to help them, like reparations. There's some contractualism stuff I'm not very well versed on, that like social contract theory to the government, like government must support its citizens and like keep them secure, etc. And also like keeping promises. This stuff is interesting. You should look into it. I don't know very much about it, other than a few rounds that I've debated. Point is, there's a lot here. you should innovate. You should not only look at cards. You should do research. You should read philosophy papers, but you should not only cite like esoteric papers. You should do the thinking yourself. You should make most of these arguments with your own words. That's my 2 cents. Hopefully this was an interesting lecture for everyone, and I will see you later.